I believe that this universe has been intentionally designed. Right from my childhood days when I'd be dismantling old clocks that I could seldom get back together, all the way through graduate school physics, I've always felt compelled to explore the world around me. For that reason, my only career has been in research physics, and for the same reason, I've devoured a range of spiritual literature. I remain a keen student of the Bible, and I have legal qualifications in Christian ministry. Now, many assume that these two pursuits are going to clash head-on, but that's never been true in my experience. As a physicist, I fully embrace the concept of the scientific method to learn about the universe, and as a spiritual person, I would never be so narrow-minded as to insist that the scientific method is the only rational means by which we can perceive reality. Rationalism itself will reveal logical boundaries to scientific inquiry without in any way diminishing its method, as we shall see. Scientific method consists of observing physical effects impartially, under controlled conditions, making the minimum number of assumptions beforehand, and, ideally, reproducing these effects. In this way, using this method, science can teach us how the universe operates, from the immense astronomical scale all the way down to the subatomic. That said, not all accepted science has come from using scientific method. Cosmology, for example, which is the study of the origin of the universe, actually cannot derive from the scientific method. Scientists believe that the earliest subseconds of the universe contained up to 11 dimensions, magnetic monopoles, and an inflation of energy of almost incalculable magnitude. Obviously, none of these postulates are reproducible. None have ever been performed in a lab. In fact, none have ever even been observed. That doesn't discredit those ideas per se, but even the ardent rationalist must confess that to believe in this theory of the origin of the universe is, ironically, not a product of scientific method, but actually an article of faith. One of science's biggest triumphs is showing how mechanisms can operate through their inherent properties, without the need for supernatural forces or magical effects. Ancient religions that claimed that objects worked because they had miniature spirits inside them, they've been disproven and dispelled. Yet it's this very advance that causes many to conclude that science has disproven the existence of a God. This is simply an overstep in logic. Scientific method can't determine whether or not natural mechanisms have been designed to work in the way that they do, or whether they've somehow self-organized or self-assembled. Figuring out how something works does not logically preclude any chance that it was designed to work that way in the first place. Take an airplane, for example. An airplane is able to fly because of the cross-sectional shape of the wing. It was a Dutch mathematician, Daniel Bernoulli, who figured out the correct shape that meant that as the airplane or the wing traveled forward, there'd be a pressure differential developed above and below the wing, and that would itself shove the plane into the air. This principle was first successfully exploited, as you may know, by the Wright brothers in North Carolina at the beginning of last century. Now let's suppose we have a witch doctor and a scientist who both observe the plane flying. The witch doctor claims that it's the disembodied spirits of the Wright brothers somehow infused in the metal which keeps the plane in the sky. The scientist, by contrast, uses scientific method to study the observable facts. She notes the weight and velocity of the plane, the pressure above and below the wing, and so forth. The scientist observes no disembodied spirits, and yet she's able to explain how the plane flies entirely through natural means. She concludes that there are no spirits lurking within the plane, which is true. She concludes that the witch doctor holds an incorrect view of the universe, which is also true. But were she to conclude that this proves the Wright brothers never existed, or Bernoulli never existed, she would be flat wrong. Yet this is exactly the mistake in logic that people make when they say science has proved that God cannot exist. The ability to explain mechanisms through natural phenomena does not prove or disprove whether an external intelligence designed them beforehand. Similarly, in my own scientific research, we developed a drug delivery system, which is a gel that has tiny little spherical molecules with the drugs on the inside. The idea is that you inject this gel under the skin, and then as the gel dissolves, the drugs can bleed out over weeks or months. And it's designed to be used with patients who aren't mentally capable, perhaps, of taking their own drugs reliably. We basically synthesized a bunch of molecular sticks. Now, they're hydrophobic on one end, which means they repel water, and they're hydrophilic on the other end, which means they attract water. And then we put the drug on the hydrophobic end. All we now have to do is take all these molecular sticks and throw them into water. And because the hydrophobic ends try and hide from the water, they cause themselves to assemble into these perfect little spheres with all the drugs on the inside. Here's the point. Humans can't physically manipulate molecules. They're too small. So if a scientist impartially observes our gel, and he knows everything about the universe, but he doesn't know about hydrophobic and hydrophilic behavior, he's going to conclude there's no way we could have built that gel. It must have come together by chance or some other way. But we had caused those tiny spheres to come together at a scale that we couldn't manipulate. We had achieved the design that we always had in the first place. It didn't look like we could have built that gel, but we had. So, what have we learned? We've seen that figuring out a natural functional system cannot logically determine whether that structure or system was designed. Science reveals a mind-boggling complexity of mechanisms at every length scale that exists. And logic insists that as complexity increases, then the probability of it being designed also increases. If any wing shape can fly, for example, then it's a lot more likely that planes can develop by chance. But science has shown beyond question, to the contrary, that our universe is almost immeasurably intricate. And this intricacy is only the beginning of the problem of believing in an undesigned world. Beyond the intricacy of natural systems, there's also a delicacy of balance of those systems, which are required for any of it to exist. Many of these balances are exactly what they need to be for life to exist, and so clearly the probability of this happening by chance gradually whittles away. At the largest length scale, we know astrophysics shows us that if the Earth is just a couple of % closer to the sun, then all the water will boil off and all life dies. But if that same Earth is a couple of % further away from the sun, why, it's too cold for life to even begin. If the Earth spins just a little bit faster, there are disastrous Coriolis winds that will destroy everything. Yet if it spins a little bit slower, the difference in temperature between daytime and nighttime becomes lethal. Similarly, the degree of oxygen has to be exactly right. It must be high enough to sustain life, obviously, but it must be low enough so that the entire planet doesn't spontaneously combust. The actual value that we have, which is about 20.9%, sits exactly within that tiny window. At the lab where I work, I myself installed oxygen deficiency monitors for protection because there's a lot of strange gases about. And they're set to trigger at 19.5% and 23%, small window. Because at 19.5%, humans will faint and suffocate and die. But at 23%, even the tiniest spark could cause a huge fire or a lethal explosion. And those small windows of acceptability pale into insignificance when we step down and start considering our universe on the molecular or atomic scale. All life on Earth is based on the atom carbon. And the probability of a carbon atom coming together requires the ground state energies of those merging nuclei to match such that the chances of it happening purely randomly is 1 in 10 to the 16. And 10 to the 16 means a 1 with 16 zeros behind it. And stepping down to the subatomic level gets more demanding still. For stars to exist, and therefore for us to have any life, because our stars are the factories for all our elements, for stars to exist, the ratio between the strong magnetic force, which is one of the 4 fundamental forces of the universe, and the electromagnetic force has a tuning delicacy of 1 part in 10 to the 40. That's a 1 with 40 zeros behind it. The perfection of these balances is statistically absurd if our universe is undesigned. In my judgment, it requires nothing short of blind faith to believe that this could have happened by chance. And blind faith doesn't appeal to me. It doesn't appeal to my rational mind. Frankly, in my opinion as a scientist, the probability of the universe forming by chance, by random interactions, is as close to 0 as one can reasonably get. Let's take an analogy. Imagine a tornado goes through a scrapyard. Could you believe that this tornado would assemble by random chance and random interaction a fully formed Boeing 787 plane? Fully fueled, fully upholstered, painted perfectly in the colors of, let's say, Virgin Atlantic, with all of its aeronautical elements perfectly contoured, and all of its software systems fully updated to their latest levels and functional. I'd like to think that in any reality, any rational mind that came across that plane in the scrapyard would say, that plane has clearly been designed, built, and brought here. And I'd like to believe that no rational mind would wander through that scrapyard and see the plane and say, wow, it must have been really windy. Now, one might think, but there's been billions of years. Surely anything is possible by random chance in that length of time. By no means. The estimated age of the universe is a mere 10 to the 17 seconds. That's not reasonably enough time for even a protein, let alone a self-replicating cell, to be constructed, if the only thing to construct it is random chance in an expanding, unthinking, barely populated space. And not that this first cell or this first protein would survive to achieve anything without the rest of an ecosystem entirely around it to make use of its existence. Science shows us that the ecosystems in which we exist are highly interdependent, meaning it requires many factors and many conditions to come together simultaneously for any part of that system to survive. And this places even higher demands on the probability of an undesigned or accidental existence. Not only that, but there are actually things in this universe we can observe which seem contrary to the idea of undesigned development. Think, for example, about human altruism or human aesthetics. In many species, parents are prepared to sacrifice their lives to keep their children alive, and that makes good sense for survival. But humans also show a propensity for children to sacrifice themselves for their parents, and that is counterproductive to the survival of the species. Similarly, if predators are hunting, then it's that varietal of the species which is distracted by aesthetics, for example, distracted by the beauty of a sunset, which is most likely to be caught, which is least likely to survive and reproduce. Now, a designer that values aesthetics and values altruism might deliberately cause them to exist, but development through random chance favoring survival would discard them. And yet, here they are. So the rational mind is now in a position to issue a challenge. How is this universe possible without intended design when it demonstrates both intricacies and a delicacy of balance of those intricacies seemingly beyond statistical probability. The only answer appears to be, well, we're unbelievably lucky. I'm sorry, that's blind faith. Both science and spirituality oppose that answer. Some suggest there could be an infinite number of universes, and that would allow even the unlikely versions to exist. Okay, problem is, that doesn't really change the question. Even if one merrily wheels in trillions and trillions of universes, the question only changes from how is this universe possible to how is it that we exist in this one universe, which of all the trillions of universes is pretty much the least likely. Again, the only answer is we're unbelievably lucky. And I agree. It's unbelievable. That's why I don't believe it. That's how I end up where I am. I believe this universe has been intentionally designed. This is a rational statement. It is fully consistent with my scientific education, and it underpins my reasoned faith. The statistical impossibilities of the heavens demands this, and therefore, by the same token, they testify to the existence of a highly skilled designer. Most importantly of all, I arrive at this conclusion not in spite of scientific method and rational deduction, but precisely because of them. Thank you.